Chief Michael Ozekhome, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, is still with us in the studio. Just before we went on that break, you were talking about how this is simulated propaganda. I know that one of the key areas, one of the key points fighting corruption is the person who heads the EFCC. There had been a big debate as to whether or not he continues to act. He can continue in acting capacity even after he's been rejected by the Senate.
Yes,
we did hear from the Vice President that indeed he's going to continue to act, and they have the choice of whether or not to represent him to the Senate.
I disagree with the Vice President. I disagree with him, and I disagree with those people who said the Vice President is a professor for a Senior Advocate of Nigeria. But it would be expecting too much from him to say he was wrong in reappointing Ibrahim Mago to the Senate. So one should expect that, but he is wrong legally. And the fundamental problem here is that when we begin to talk about EFCC and we are talking about Mago, it is a failure of institutions. We should have strong institutions, not strong persons. And that is why each time you discuss EFCC, you discuss Mago, you discuss Mago, you discuss EFCC. How many people know, for example, that under Section 2, subsection 1B of the EFCC Act, that there's supposed to be a board running EFCC with Mago as the executive chairman, that the EFCC board is supposed to have the head or representatives of the NIA, DSSS, Minister of External Affairs, Minister of Finance, Minister of members of the Nigerian Police Force, that is representing Inspector General of Police, that you have to have representatives of critical arms like NDIC, Nigeria Deposit Insurance Company. Many Nigerians do not know that, as a matter of fact, the FCC is not just about one person. It ought to run through a board. Is this board in place, which also has DSSS, police, NIA, and such critical elements?
But the board is not involved in day-to-day running of the organization, is it?
Yes, we are talking. That is why I'm saying the board ought to be in charge, not a one-man riot squad.
So perhaps,
and when I hear,
Chief, so perhaps the board is not in place, perhaps it is in place, but for the day-to-day running of the EFCC,
yes,
perhaps the most important person there,
yes,
should be the chairman, of the EFCC, right?
But if we have strong institutions, you should not worry about the person who occupies that position. Before Ibrahim Mago, we had a Nuhuru Badu, we had a Farida Waziri, we had an Ibrahim Lamodi. We now have Ibrahim Mago. After Ibrahim Mago, there will still be another person again, like we say in Common Palace. Soldiers go, soldiers come. Barracks remain. The people who are saying that he can continue to act, even when rejected by the Senate, are wrong. They are wrong because you cannot take parts of the EFCC Act that you love and you throw away the other parts that you do not like. Is there any EFCC? Yes. How did it come into being? How did the EFCC come into being? What breathed life, oxygen, into the EFCC is the EFCC Establishment Act, Law Number 1, Laws of the Federation of Nigeria, 2004, that says we hereby set up an EFCC. And these are the functions. That is why it is because of the EFCC Act that they can go to people's houses, mop up their phones, listen to their discussions, that they can attach people's property, that they can freeze people's assets, people's monies, expertise. It is the same act that prescribes that the executive chairman shall be appointed by the president subject to confirmation by the Senate. Subject to means predicated on, dependent on. Without the Senate, you cannot act. An acting position is a stopgap measure. It is not forever. It is not permanent. Now, they are banning Section 171 of the Constitution. No, there is nothing in conflict between Section 171 of the Constitution and Section 2, subsection 3 of the FCC Act that deals with the executive chairman. Section 171 of the Constitution merely outline certain positions: secretary to the government of the federation, head of the civil service of the federation, personal staff of the president. For example, ministers are not even named there. Ministers are named in section 147, meaning that section 171 is not exhaustive. Now, it is those people mentioned there that you can talk about president living in an acting capacity, not the FCC Act, which has clearly said this is how you can appoint my executive chairman. The principle in law is exclusio unius, exclusio ulterius. The express mentioning of one thing is the total exclusion of all others. Do you know what they want us to do, Makwe? Let me tell you what they are saying. They are saying, take the parts of EFCC Act that you like, discard the others. They are playing to the gallery like the quote Ayi Kwe Ama, the Ghanaian author, envisaged in his classical book, The Beautiful Ones Are Not Yet Born, where he talked about a bird called Chichidodo. The Chichidodo bird hates human excrement, human feces, with all his heart. But you know the food of this Chichidodo bird? Maggots that wriggle out of decaying human excrement. It is like saying you don't like beans, but your best food is akara. Your best food is momoy. It is like saying you do not like the heat, but you like staying in the kitchen. It is like saying you do not like wetness, but you like jumping into the river. It is oxymoronically wrong. It is paradoxically wrong. So it's either we take all the EFCC parts, or we throw it away. If there is no EFCC Act, there can be no EFCC. It is the Act that prescribes the functions that also now prescribe how personnel who administer these functions are themselves appointed.
The EFCC Act prescribes how the EFCC chairman should be appointed.
Yes.
But does it give room for acting?
It doesn't give room for acting. That is why I say when you have mentioned something, once Senate rejects, that is the end of it. For example, when Senate rejects ministers under Section 147 of the Constitution, can Mr. President retain the person as acting minister? When Senate rejects ambassadors, high commissioners, under Section 171 of the Constitution, can the President retain the person as acting ambassador, acting high commissioner? A rejection puts a stop to it. Let me tell you this. We borrowed our presidentialism from America. So far, there have been 9 cabinet rejections in America. There have been 13 withdrawals, either by themselves or the president quickly withdrawing so as not to be disgraced before the Senate. There have been 160 nominations to the Supreme Court. About 34 of them have failed. The first rejection was of Mr. Rogers in 1789, when he was rejected by the Senate. The most first important rejection was by President Andrew Jackson in 1833. And when they rejected him, he quickly withdrew it. When under President Bush, Mr. John Tower, was rejected as Secretary of Defense, he regretted it because that man was very important. But he withdrew him quietly. There was nothing to it. Heavens did not fall. When Debo Adegbile, the 47-year-old Nigerian, was rejected by the Senate, under the new rules made by the Senate in November last year under Obama, he was to head the Human Rights Department of the Justice, the Human Rights section of the Justice Department. Obama almost wept. He said, "Oh my God, this guy is good. Why are you rejecting him?" They rejected him because they said he had handled an appeal of one Al-Jama who was convicted of killing some Philadelphia police officers. So the Senate could reject for good reason, for bad reason, but once they do, it stops it. In fact, the Senate could even refuse to withhold assent. There have been 154 assents withheld by the Senate between 1987 and 1996 in America. Heavens did not fall. The rejection of a person sent to the Senate means that the acting capacity itself has frozen out by a friction of time. Because you cannot act forever.